fine. It's good. Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Janae Buchanan, and I have the privilege of speaking in front of you today. Today, my advocacy speech is going to be about whether or not we should allow transgender women to play in women's sports or on women's sports teams. Now, I understand that this topic has been recently debated and dealt with by our president, Mr. Trump, and he has put in an executive order to not allow transgender women to play on women's sports. However, I do still believe that all aspects of this conversation needs to be discussed, or of this topic needs to be discussed. Firstly, allowing transgender women to play on women's sports teams is simply unfair. Secondly, it has a massive impact on women's opportunities. And lastly, the biblical background involved in this topic is something that needs to be taken into consideration. And then I will finish by allowing time for possible counter arguments. The first point I would like to make when it comes to allowing transgender women in female sports is simply the fairness of this idea. There is a reason biological females and biological males do not compete against each other. Joanna Harper, a sports scientist who is also transgender, was interviewed about the fairness of allowing transgender women to play against women. She stated that the question is not entirely about whether or not there is an advantage as play, because this point is clear, but that the question is really about allowing meaningful competition. She also gave an example of boxing. It is not often that a large boxer is placed in the ring with a smaller boxer. Why? Because A, it is unfair, and B, there would be no sense of meaningful competition. Take wrestling, for example. To determine who qualifies to wrestle with whom, the wrestlers are weighed. They are then matched with someone who weighs nearly the same as they do, allowing a fair and meaningful competition to proceed. Ross Tucker, who is also a sports scientist, highlights the effect of puberty on men and women. Quote, when boys reach the age of 13 to 14, things start to change physically, and we see increased muscle mass, bone density, changes the shape of the skeleton, changes the heart and lung, hemoglobin levels, and all of these things are significant contributors to performance, end quote. Fairness and meaningful competition are one important aspect of banning transgender women in women's sports. The next topic I would like to discuss is about the prohibition of women's opportunities. We have already discussed that there is an unfairness behind allowing transgender women in women's sports, but it also creates an inability for women to have equal opportunities, which is actually against the law. Article 9 states, quote, no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance, end quote. Now we're going to focus on the beginning of that sentence and then get to the federal funding part afterwards. It's not that that part isn't important, it's just not immediately what I'm going to be talking about. While Article 9 does not clearly state transgender women cannot play in women's sports, it does explain that there's to be no discrimination in sports because of gender. Article 9 was first passed because women were not even allowed to play sports, especially in universities and colleges, which were both receiving federal funding. When President Trump signed his executive order titled, quote, No Men in Women's Sports Act, end quote, Maine decided to tell the president that they would not comply, and they were firm on their stance on allowing transgender athletes on their women's sports teams. President Trump declared that should Maine decide to continue to hold this stance, Trump was going to cut them off from federal funding. Why? Because allowing transgender women in women's sports teams is discrimination based on, firstly, scientific differences, and then this goes against Article 9. It is important to note as well that during our previous president's term, President Biden attempted to expand Article 9 to include a more specific stance on transgender athletes because of a horrific statistic about harassment as well as sexual assault in this category. Not to mention the fact that men are often a lot stronger than women, so naturally women were getting hurt. This expansion was not granted, so by the time Trump was sworn in again, he had to start over from square one. Lastly, I would like to touch on the biblical foundation of men and women's differences. Genesis 1:27 states, quote, so God created man in his own image. Male and female he created them, end quote. God created both males and females after his own image, meaning they are equally valuable and to be honored. In the next chapter of Genesis, God explains that it was not good for man to be alone, so he created a helper for him. This is proclaiming that men and women are meant to complement each other. Finally, 1 Corinthians 12:18-20 states, quote, but as it is, God arranged the members in the body, each one of them as he chose. If all were a single member, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, yet one body, end quote. In conclusion, I understand that this topic can be controversial and cause some to be offended. While I have tried my best to be as respectful as possible, this is a topic that needs to be discussed, regardless of controversial opinions. For whatever reason, culture has started saying respectfully before they say something that is harsh or maybe offensive, but I am not going to do that. Why? Because girls around the US are being disrespected. Because it takes one to know one. Because you need to treat other people how you need to be treated. Because it is unfair both morally and scientifically to allow transgender women who have decided to change their gender, aside from what God has ordained it to be, to play on women's sports teams. We have allowed them to mistreat, hurt, discriminate, bully, and disregard others. Men and women were created unique for a reason. They are to be equally respected for a reason, and they are not to be mistreated for any reason. Thank you.